Everybody yesterday. Got a beautiful, perfect day to celebrate.
Hold on.
Nope.
Real life, Friday sound good.
You did. I heard that. You did. Sorry.
Good. Everything is.
Everything's having
Yeah.
a today. Some days are like that.
It should be on.
Okay.
You're gonna have to cut that off and come back on.
Yeah, this one? Okay, can you hit it?
There you go.
Oh, it does. Okay, great. So this was, what we talked about when we were talking about animals. Ask the animals and they will teach you. I love that language. The birds of the air, and they will tell you. Ask the plants, they will teach you. So we start our lessons with these scriptures. There we go. Oh, let me go back. Now it's working. There we go. And this one I thought was a really, really great one, this idea of land ownership, which.
Right, so when you think about it, the Western concept, the Western ideal that's been assigned to Judeo-Christianity is one of ownership of land, right? Of that term dominion. That's what we hearken back to. But in reality, in Leviticus, that's what they talk about in this, is that we're tenants on the land. We're stewards of this land for a period of time, and then it's turned over to the next person. Who owns the land? It's God. Right? God owns the land, and we're merely stewards for the time that we are here. And I think, I know for me growing up in a more rural environment, in a less industrialized environment, I'm sure a lot of you the same way, you understood that concept. You knew farmers, you had farmers in your family, you understood that relationship with the land. But I think that's different for kids nowadays because they don't have that. They see the real estate side of it and who owns which parcel of land. But in reality, the message we're trying to get across here is that, that there is no permanence there, that we're merely stewards for a period of time.
So this is, we're not going to go over every single slide, but we just want to give you a flavor and a taste of the things we're talking about. We talked a lot about relationship and diversity of species and living together, and that's what makes the world so beautiful and rich. When we did our lesson on soil, we talked about the Dust Bowl and what happened there, and so the kids were like, what?
Yeah, these are videos. So, we would click these blue underline, we'd click them and then they'd see a video that we find. And that was the PBS series on the Dust Bowl, which none of them had ever seen. I'm sure y'all have seen it. And they were shocked. They were shocked that even existed, that happened over time, as a relation to the farming practices. So that was, I think, eye-opening for them to expose them to some of that kind of thing. But that's one that I didn't think was going to have a big point, but they latched onto it.
This was the lesson that I learned the most about. I didn't really know what carbon offsets.
Right.
I've heard this in, investment talk about how corporations are trying to minimize their carbon footprints, and this whole concept of monetizing or assigning, quantifying economic value to carbon. So I learned so much about just the carbon cycle and what that means, and the kids too. I just saw their eyes.
And it wasn't a science class. We weren't really in high level detail I wasn't giving them problems that they had to do on a sheet of paper to do calculations, but just to understand the process and what it meant to say I'm offsetting carbon, or I'm buying carbon credits, or I'm trying to make a reduction in carbon, in atmospheric carbon. That's what we tried here.
Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. That's fun.
And there's a lot of carbon in rocks if you're looking at this slide. You can take that home.
Yeah.
You can get carbon in rocks. That's the way to go. Yeah.
Did it go? Did it go?
It
Skipped one? No, okay. One more. Yeah. So we were talking about, with each lesson, and then we would identify what are the most pressing issues around this, right? So we talked a lot about air pollution, and we talked a little bit about kind of calling back from year 2 curriculum, the justice questions that arise about certain neighborhoods that have high levels of toxic oil or toxic soil, toxic air pollution, and how sometimes we see intersections and overlapping. We talked about water pollution and impacts. One of the things that they could not stop talking about was the river on fire.
Yeah, I think that's the next slide.
The next slide.
Yeah, so this right here, I think, one of the things, this is a good slide because this takes in a lot of what we did during, the freshwater class. When we talked a little bit about what pollution is, where does it come from, How does it happen? At what levels does it happen? I mean, radioactive waste sounds terrible, but it's a small fraction of what we consider, aquatic levels of pollution. And then we talked, again, about some examples that they may have heard about. The water crisis in Flint, Michigan, the water crisis in Jackson, Mississippi. They had a video around that. So it's stuff that they had heard about, but maybe didn't understand at the most finite level, the issues that were being placed on people, especially in these historically disadvantaged communities, that don't really have a say in it.
That's a tragic photograph.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think the take home for this is 80% of sewage and wastewater in the world is untreated. It basically flows directly into drinking water. People share their sewage, wastewater with their drinking water. And that is tragic.
I'm curious, and if I'm jumping ahead, stop me, but do you then come back around to local issues? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah,
All right.
so we're just trying to give you some overview
Sure.
of the things that we talk about, and how we talked about. We use a lot of video, short videos to help explain some of these things. We're talking a lot when we were talking about animals and biodiversity and plant diversity, just talking how important bees are. We talked about the boll weevil story in Alabama.
Yeah, and the Enterprise, how they were able to switch from cotton because of the weevil blight that was there, and they have a statue of it. I mean, a very almost pagan looking statue, if you've ever been to Enterprise, Alabama, to the weevil, because it forced them to shift their economy from continuously, having cotton, and George Washington Carver and the impacts there with peanuts.
And this is, high school students, it's probably a lot different than you remember how high school is, particularly because so many of our students are taking AP classes, which are college level courses that work in this way, in tying together many different concepts that they have learned about in different places. So they're kind of young to be doing this. And one of the things that's so important to us here is to have these conversations, but also have them informed in faith, in our relationship with God and each other here. And so giving them that kind of undergirding of all of this.
Yeah, and if you think back to one of the readings that we had, there was on biodiversity, and that we tied it directly to this. And I think one of the things that's important is there's the Cuyahoga River. One of the things that we try not to do is we try not to tell them how to think. We don't want to tell them how to think. We want to inform them of the issues and let them talk through it. How does this make you feel? Inform them of some of the science behind it, but they're going to be bored to death if they hear me talk about science for an hour and a half. So, we talk about current things that are going on and how does that make you feel? How do you think we should resolve that problem? That's the type of stuff. But yeah, Cuyahoga River, I'm sure everybody here probably knows about it, the river in Cleveland catching on fire. They were amazed by that story, and that keeps coming up. And I'm like, this is one bullet on one slide in one video we shot, but they just could not imagine that, they've never been to Cleveland, obviously, but they couldn't imagine that a river could catch on fire. But this was a discussion of why we are where we are with protecting water. All these events happened that led to the formation of Clean Water Act.
Yeah, so we talked about the EPA and some regulations. So when we would have our lessons, we would talk about this stuff. And then we would talk about, so we would we would discuss the issue, the problem that's where a lot of them are left in school and in what they read and what they consume in the media. They're kind of left with the problem. They're not given or encouraged to have conversations about solutions and what roles they might play, what future careers they might think of for themselves. So that was a lot of what we would do, is we would highlight the problems, and then we would look and say, okay, let's talk about the innovation, the success stories, because so much of this are these issues. There's risk, there's financial risk around insurance with rising sea levels. It's going to affect real estate prices, it affects insurance markets. So it also ties into the business. I mean, if you've heard of ESG investing, environmental, social, governance investing, that's a hot topic right now. There's a lot of fighting about it, but not a lot of understanding about why people are starting to have those conversations, because it's, in a capitalist market, you want to go where the profit is. And there's not as much profit when you have environmental degradation and your real estate is underwater. So these are things we have to think about. We have to talk
Yeah,
about.
we do that a lot, personally for work, ecosystem valuation, basically working to assign a value to functions within an ecosystem, right? So water, water, clean air, those type of things, which a lot of people do, but they've been taken for granted for years, that they're doing the right thing. So we live in a capitalistic society. So if you can tie a value to that, especially an economic dollars and cents value to it, then it becomes more important to people regardless of their opinions on the subject. So that's what we talk about here. And then what are some of the limitations? We want them to learn how to effectively evaluate it. There's not just one solution. Any solution is going to have multiple layers to it. It might be a legislative issue, might be a policy-based issue. It might have secondary impact. So, just hearing what sounds like a great solution, we want them to critically think about it and think about all sides of that solution.
Mm-hmm. And what are maybe some of the downsides of that solution? Right. We had a great conversation about electric cars and batteries. Mm-hmm. So it's you may sort of solve something, but then cause another problem downstream. We had lots of great conversations about conservation and preservation, and in some of our examples where we got to. This is the part where we get to showing them every lesson. When we would highlight the issues and then look at what was happening, we would have a solution that we could point to locally, nationally, internationally. So we could always tie it back. We're all dealing with these things all across the world, but it's also what is happening right here in the Big Bend, in Florida, in your city. So these were some of the things, here's.
And this is a perfect one talking about water, that. Exactly what you asked about when you were talking about water. A lot of them didn't understand protecting spring flows and water quality. So what we do in Tallahassee, what we do in South Georgia, how that impacts Wakulla Spring, how that impacts the Wakulla River. What they do in Atlanta with water impacts oyster beds in the Gulf of Mexico. That's a concept that's difficult for them. It's a concept that's difficult for adults. Because you're working across these arbitrary boundaries that government and society is set up, and the ecosystem doesn't work that way. So there was a whole lot of talk there. This was one right in their backyard. I think they got a lot from on this one. And then the next one, which gets to us nationally, and this is some work that we're doing out west. A lot of people hear about prescribed fire, risk mitigation from fire out west, massive wildfires, and they have historically managed forests very differently than we do here. I mean, if you watch WCTV News at night, they're going to tell you, there was a prescribed fire that was going on in Thomasville today, and you could see it on the radar, and we smell smoke, and people are like, oh, okay, they're burning here, there. It's very different out west. They're not used to that. They don't use fire to manage their forest on a regular basis. It's been pushed out, and as a result, they have these timber foxes out there that as soon as they get fire on them, they go up. And there's a little bit of cultural, just so everybody knows, a little bit of cultural bias that people out west think, we don't have to listen to those yahoos from the south. They don't know what they're doing. But all the practices and techniques that Tall Timbers uses that we use on a day-to-day basis, they came directly from the Native Americans that were here before. We learned from them and said, well, why are they burning? This is why they're burning the forest every day. They don't have catastrophic. So this is some discussion we had about stuff that we're doing out there. I have a lot of experience with this and how we're sharing stewardship across boundaries. So, we work with the U.S. Forest Service, we work with the state forestry agencies, we work with the conservation organizations out there. Everybody's working together towards a common goal of reducing fire risk and managing these forests the way historically they would have been managed without human intervention.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we have such a gem in our backyard with Tall Timbers. If any of you have never gone out there and learned about, see what they do, it's incredible the research that is happening there, and they're a worldwide leader in this. And just, the economic impact of the quail hunt industry in our area is a direct result from the benefits of this prescribed burning and fire.
And it's difficult. It's a difficult conversation or difficult thing for people to have your head around, because you think forestry, logging, timber management is bad because we think about it in the Amazon. But that's one of the big problems they have out west. They don't have an active forest markets industry. So this wood that's out there that needs not to look like this, historically, it did not look like this when Lewis and Clark were there. It looked like this. How do you get from this to this? Well, if you have active forest markets, you can use that market to take the wood off and maintain it, and then it does look like this. So that's something there's a whole lot of complexity to the issue other than, hey, we want to reduce it, but we want to not worry about cutting trees down.
Mm-hmm. So lots of the other conversations that we had on the international scale were how in conservation, how to involve local people in decisions affecting their own habitats where they live. There are so many dollars tied around tourism. Think about when you go to a beautiful island and you want to go on a deep sea fishing trip, or you want to snorkel and see a reef. Well, if your reef is blown to smithereens because the water's too hot and everything's dead, that's going to really negatively impact that community. So how can the people who live in these communities help be involved in making decisions that will protect these wonderful assets like animals and water?
Like, self-policing basically is the concept. So, we have a very idealized view of the way that things should occur and the way habitats and animals should be managed across the world. But we also have to remember what the livelihood of the people who are there are, and what have they historically gotten value from. So, and that's shifting over time. And so, there are some great organizations that do this, but basically showing these local communities, incentivizing these local communities to think of the long-term benefits of protecting these species, and basically owning and running their own tourist safari ventures, as opposed to somebody like me going over there and setting up shop and doing it, basically using legislative power, laws, and financial incentives from these conservation groups so that they can own that and have them grow that community in the future.
And then our last slide before we open it up to conversation is I want to kind of tie it back to what the students are actually doing. So I don't know that I really just described this very well at the beginning. So when I talk about when we're making loans, what we're doing is we're making microloans through a website called kiva.org, Kiva. Anyone can go on there and create an account and log on and begin investing. So this is a very different concept of moving capital about the world. It is not a charity model where I give $50 to somebody and that's it, and I just give them money. This is a loan. I am making an investment. I can research and look for, there's a bazillion different filters on Kiva. I can look for specific loans around fishing. I can look for loans around ecotourism. I can look for loans around jewelry making or clothing making or selling vegetables at a market. Whatever I want, I can do a filter and I can find a whole list of people who have been vetted through field partners that Kiva works all around the world with small banks to get this capital into the hands of small entrepreneurs, because there are so many barriers. It's so difficult for particularly women around the world to have access to capital to start businesses. And $1,000, $5,000, $2,000 can make the world of difference. So Kiva acts as sort of a crowdsource funding hub where investments come from all over. Students, $25, dribs and drabs. We have a team. We have our St. John's GPL team on Kiva. That's where the students are making their loans. So when you contribute to the GPL program here at St. John's, what is happening is that money is coming to the church, and then I send credits to the students a little bit at a time. I start them with $25. Make sure that they know what they're doing, because this is real money. This is not pretend money. This is real money. So, and they are seeing themselves as investment managers on behalf of you, on behalf of this congregation. So they take this responsibility seriously, because I always remind them this is real money. So they will take that $25 credit that I've given them. They will research where they decide who's going to get this loan. And then they come back every month and share that out with the group. And it's making them think about why, what are you doing and why are you doing it? And it does, a lot of times it's not super high level reasons.
That's
it's
right.
like, I went to Quito. I love the country. I love the people. I want to invest in that place. Or I care a lot about sustainable farming and not having pesticides. And so I care about that. So that's where I'm going to make my loans. The second year students are making loans in Black-owned American businesses. The third year students, we're inviting them to make loans. So they've been with us. Our third year students have been with us. This is their third year. So those loans they made in year one got repaid. That money comes back to the student. Then the student makes another loan. And then when that's repaid, it comes back. And then when that student graduates, the capital comes back to the church and I fund a new student. So it becomes a very sustainable program in of itself, is that money is staying in circulation. So right now we have about $8,000 under investment all around the world. And it's really cool and exciting that the students are the ones making these decisions. So these are just some examples of climate pilot type loans that these students in year 3 can be making. So they're having a.
And I'll say one thing, I haven't been in the first 2 classes, so I'm not sure how they were doing it there. But I think one of the interesting things, and this is a good slide that you shared with this, is it doesn't have to be a direct one-to-one loan on a specific topic. If we're talking about climate, it's not somebody necessarily just putting up solar panels, right? Or just planting trees. They, at this level, they can kind of take what we've talked about in class and how, maybe the reduction in the amount of water that's used for washing clothes, the wastefulness of water that's washing clothes can conserve water at a larger scale. So then they can find someone who's doing that with their clothes and fund a program like that. They're able to think, at least at our class, I've been able to see on a little bit higher level. It's not just a direct tie. They can see how this is making an impact down the road, which is impressive. And it's, it goes back to like the water thing, carrying the water a long way. Kids in those communities that have to travel and spend all day, what are they not doing? They can't go to school. They can't be educated. They can't grow from education and have a better life because they're having to walk all day in these local communities to go get water. So if we can bring the water closer to them, and that's one one of the students had this year that I thought it really picked up on that from the lessons.
So we'll end there with our overview. Do you have any questions for us in particular about this program, Steve?
Yeah, a couple of observations. First of all, I really think you're not a serious investor until you put your own money at risk. And you can see it go down in value when your stomach tightens up and say, what the heck did I just do? So them doing this, they're putting, I think they have to put $25.
They have to put in $25 of their own money.
Is at risk, and I think that's the lesson where you really learn. Second observation, my daughter lives in Montana. One of the conflicts out in Montana with forest management is the state and locals versus the federal government. The federal lands and the locals feel they're much better equipped and much more knowledgeable on how to do it, and the feds have screwed it up. And they did that with a beetle infestation out in the west.
Yeah.
And the third thing, this is just
it's funny that you're talking about, we're working on that exact same issue, trying to help the feds on that exact same issue, yeah.
The other thing do any of your kids think that carbon dioxide is a poisonous gas and has to be eliminated?
No, I don't think so.
No.
Okay,
No.
because that's what we hear, CO2 is bad, you have to get rid of it. Well, you need it.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that we try to do, you can basically, in this day and age, hear whatever you want to hear. You choose your station and they'll tell you what you want to hear. So what we try to do with this is explain, and that's why we don't go into so much detail, but we do want to explain the carbon cycle and what is actually making a difference, what is kind of lip service to it, why is it important, how important is it, just same instance when I was talking about radioactive waste. It sounds terrible, right? It sounds like, oh, that's going to be a big problem in our water column, but that's really minuscule, especially in the U.S. You hear about it, but it's really not that big of a deal because it very rarely happens. So we try to frame it in the context of, how much is this impacting versus how much is this not impacting, and so they don't kind of glob onto the sensationalized stories they always.
Yeah, and really at the end of the day, we want them to think. We want them to think about these things. We want them to see the big picture and how all of these things are related. And in our planet, we are all connected and related. So when harm is caused, it can harm us too. And so just to be thinking about that and to thinking about what they could do too. And that's what is exciting for us when they start to share with us as seniors,
Sure.
what they want to study in college, what they're interested in. We try to show lots of different career paths through business, finance, investment, through science, through teaching, history, whatever they want to do. We try to show.
Yeah, or, we have one student who loves to fish. And so he viewed everything through that lens of, microplastics, well, that's an issue definitely to me, because I never really thought about microplastics and bioaccumulation of chemicals in the fish I'm eating. That was something just from a personal experience that he was able to kind of latch onto. That's fast. That's the most fascinating part to me, to see which portions they glob onto.
Yeah. Mary Ann.
Is this program codified and available, in other communities? I mean, maybe you already said the origins of it are.
Yeah, we kind of made it up. So we're just, until people tell us.
It's not franchise.
Stop doing stuff, we're just gonna keep doing stuff. So, we don't have a franchise on this, but I actually have talked to some of my colleagues because there's a lot of hand-wringing about the church is declining and young people aren't in church. And it's sometimes I wonder, well, what are we talking about? Are we talking about things that matter to young people?
Relevant to kids.
Are we inviting them into these conversations? Are we, through what we believe, and the God that we believe and understand? So some of my colleagues are kind of interested in this because it's an interesting mix of business and stewardship and money and science and history and.
Yeah, they may not understand the relationship between what the church, what God is calling us to do, and these issues they hear about every day. And I think that tie is kind of the most important thing that we're doing. That dwelling in the word, which we're a long way from those slides, tying that into everything we talk about with them, I think is good. But then letting them just interact and talk about it and see that as a place they can.
And a lot of it's relationship. It's relationship of the adults who love these kids. We're here for them.
Yeah.
We want to hear what they think about stuff. We want to, they can share their worries with us and we can be a place, that we're together.
And they grew up very different than us. I mean, that's even for me, and I'm probably closer in age than some people here, not naming any names. But it's just very, very different. They grew up in a very different society with different things that they can do. They didn't get kicked out of their house every morning. They just say,
go play outside.
Come back, in the summer, when the street light comes on. That's not the life they live.
Yeah. Jerry.
Well, Kate, I'm so excited that you guys are doing this. This is what I do for work. So I have a couple of questions. One, I would love to, I'd be interested in whether whether they're being allowed to talk about our practices as a church and come say, well, how are we investing our money as a church? Should we be doing social investing, But that'd be a difficult conversation to have.
That conversation's actually happened at the foundation level, and we are not investing in fossil fuels.
Yeah, good. Our church campus is from China. It's not at all, not hardly any native plants, should we do something about that? I don't know. I'm just thinking there'll be some interesting conversations about bringing some of the practices home to think about doing things differently that we might all take on as a project. We don't want to start with the church, maybe we could start with our cemetery, which are just our land that we are stewards of. Maybe we could think about some actual practical hands-on projects.
And that's a great segue.
Which is just like a step down from this. And I have a lot of other ideas that we have internship programs that I've worked with Fish and Wildlife Commission.
Oh, yeah, okay.
So we have internship programs that some of them might be interested in. And,
fabulous.
Anyway.
Well, that's a great segue because we want to talk about this is a natural progression. When you start having these conversations, it starts to lead you to thinking about, well, what am I doing in my own life? And what are we doing in our collective life? And why do we have so many disposable things? I had a conversation with Johnny about why don't we have coffee mugs? Instead, why do we have, we throw away 100 coffee cups every Sunday because nobody wants to wash them? Like maybe we could wash them.
We gotta, yeah, we were teaching a lesson on single-use plastics and plastic bags. Everybody in the room was drinking out of a single-use plastic water bottle.
It does, it
Wow,
makes you
we
think
had-
about your
including
own
myself.
choices and actions.
Yeah.
Yeah, so.
We can serve better in the 70s.
Yeah, that's right, that's exactly right.
True, convenience and speed and disposable
That's
things has
100%,
become,
yeah.
because everything's so fast now and people want things quick.
Yeah.
So, but those are great conversations to have. And so I was hoping that Dennis, if you'd be willing to share, or any others who know about the Green Faith Alliance. I don't know much about it, but we would love to hear what that's all about.
Sure. The Green Faith Alliance here in Tallahassee is composed of a group of churches that have some aspect of environmental protection as part of, and stewardship as part of their program. And so they meet monthly and talk about what they're doing at their churches. And it's kind of like a pollination, cross-pollination thing. So and I've been sitting on that for a while, and but I've been more of an observer than a proponent, and would love to see if we could try to do some things that other churches do, or at least consider them. So that's one possibility.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is you really touch my heart when you were talking about how it's the children, the youth, who really feel the impacts of what we've done to them as older people. And, we didn't mean to do any harm, but we've given them a real dilemma to deal with. And they're the ones who feel it the most and probably are the most traumatized or the most motivated by it. But for our generation, there's investments that you can make in the right way, but it just seems like there's more we could be doing. And I really love the premise that the church, we have a role in that stewardship. So I'm not recommending anything, but I would like to help with this program for sure, because I think it's fantastic.
Wonderful. We love having scientists, especially people environmental, who understand these things, to come and give them real world knowledge and share your experiences of traveling, of working, of researching. It's wonderful.
Yeah, and then the growth next year too, our thought was to get them out there, get them in the field, because we're in a classroom every day and they like the food for sure. But if I know how I learn, and if I'm out there kicking the dirt, so to speak, you learn a lot more. So I think we're going to try to interject that into the concepts next year.
With all the safeguarding and all
Of course.
and everything. So you
I took my classes.
Good job. Kathy, did you have something to share?
I just wanted to thank you and say how wonderful these materials are. I don't know whether there might be a mini series of future adult forums where you take, an individual topic a Sunday morning. I would find that really interesting. So I know you don't need more things to do, but.
Well, the beauty is that once the curriculum is created, Marianne, to your point, the hard work is pulling all the research and the ideas together into a coherent conversation. And then once that part is done, I'm very delighted to teach that. If there's interest, I would be willing. I did a 6-week course of year 2 that Elizabeth, could speak about if you want to share about that. And I would be happy to do a year 3, 6-week. We gathered, we had dinner. It always, all roads lead to my stomach. I'm like, I need a meal. So we had dinner together, and then we learned.
Yeah, it was a great class, and you'd be amazed how much you learn that you think you know and you realize you don't. And a lot of thought-provoking things came out of that. And it was called GPL for adults, and it was year 2 on the economic effects of racism.
And the church played roles. I regret to inform you, the Episcopal Church did not have really clean hands on the slave trade. And so we talk about that. There was a wonderful performance last night at Word of South, and there was a young woman, African-American, well, no, she's not American, she's Canadian, of African descent, who grew up in Montreal, and she talked about her life, and she said, we don't have to fear the past, we just have to face it. We just have to face it. And so I thought she said it a couple of times and I was like, wow, that is exactly right.
We need a Truth and Reconciliation Commission in the United States.
Yeah, and
don't we?
you can't move forward if you can't have these hard conversations, just be kind of trapped in conflict, and that's no good.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I'm really proud of that this program does is we talk about solutions a lot. I mean, we talk about solutions because it's easy to get mired in, is this bad? Is this going to have a problem moving forward in the future? But really focusing on, what are the solutions and what do they think are solutions that are important to them? But I like the idea of them, giving suggestions for the church and what do they want to see.
I
think that's an
internships and things for them to think about, of ways that they can actually have a meaningful impact. And that's what I love so much about this program, is that they are actually doing something meaningful now.
Yeah.
There's a program also called Holy Hikes that I toyed with trying to get started. I was too busy and just didn't make it happen. And it's hard to hike in the summer here, but we can do it in the cooler weather months. And you actually hike and have your service outdoors as you kind of hike and meditate. And
I love that. That could be a front porch thing. That could
Yep.
So all these, so Susan Walton is here with us today from the Outreach Commission. And so I will maybe just leave the charge with y'all. It just takes somebody to convene a group and to lead a group, I think there's a lot of interest in having these conversations. So we just keep talking, and maybe we can form a creation care subgroup of our outreach. I don't know, that's a possibility. That's a place where I think it makes sense.
I think Janice is getting the ball rolling on a lot of stuff. So, and this is such a good way, a segue to make people aware.
Yeah.
Doing things like this.
Yeah.
And by the youth being involved.
Yeah, having some youth, having people who work in these fields, or people who just care about these issues. So what can we do as a community? And bringing forth suggestions to the Finance Committee, to the vestry, to the foundation around investments. These are things that we care about and we would like to see changed. And it's a conversation. Other people may not agree or not want to have those conversations, but we can have tension of disagreement. It's okay. One of the things we talk a lot about in year 3 is, especially when you're talking about a global plant, like these arbitrary boundaries and borders between countries and spaces, it takes collaboration to really approach these big, large problems. And it takes listening to other people and some empathy in that before you just come in with your, like, this is what you need to do to fix this problem. That doesn't ever work. And so how do you listen? How do you respect other cultures, and come to some place that you can agree?
Well, I'm just anxious. I mean, this curriculum is so well thought out, and, with all the connections to internet information, I'm anxious that it be advertised and made available, like go to the National Baptist Convention and say, here we have this curriculum.
Do you think they would let me do that? I don't know if they would listen to it, but.
It just is too good to just.
Oh, you're so sweet. Well, I'm actually talking with the folks at the Episcopal Parish Network about this, and maybe doing a talk. I haven't talked to you about this yet.
This is how it happens, right here.
Brad knows how it goes. We might do this on a national level.
You mentioned charities are some that will take gifts and do microloans, and and create that pool of money, keeps going with the gift you get.
Yes.
Episcopal Relief and Development has a program like that, and there's the FINCA.
Okay.
Charity.
I'm not familiar, but that's great. I know the National Church is doing a lot around creation care. They're doing a lot around race and beloved community. So we are blessed to be part of a denomination that is having these conversations. So we should avail ourselves.
I was just at a place with a bunch of colleagues that's over in the northeast part of Florida that does, it's a private conservation organization that does a lot of breeding of endangered animals to try to help reestablish populations or stabilize populations. And it was so striking to me that all the animals that they were working on are the same places where human refugees are coming from. You know, and there's just this global conflict and resources and the not looking at resources. I mean, the Middle East was the land of milk and honey, right? You know, it didn't used to be the scarified landscape that it is now. And we faced with climate change and all that exacerbating all these issues, it's not just destroying the natural world and causing the imperilment of so many species, it's imperiling us and causing all this horrible heartache and refugee crises and, you know, that sort of thing. And it really is all tied together.
It is.
And it is totally wrapped up in our faith, or lack thereof, or misunderstanding.
Yeah,
That's right.
That's right.
How to
Yeah.
respond.
And how to respond effectively.
Right, how to respond. We talk about that in year one. We talk about global poverty and the causes of poverty and conflict and climate. And we do a whole lesson on United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And the kids break them apart and they each get one and research and come back and make their loans based on what they've learned. So.
And I'll give you a perfect example of that we taught in the class is the Carroll Sea, if anybody's familiar with that. What's left of it. And the reason that there's such a problem there, where you can tie it back to economic sanctions during the Cold War that we placed on Russia. And so they moved into Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, drained the sea, which at the time was like the size of Ireland. It's like the third largest inland sea. And they drained the sea because they could not get agricultural commodities from other nations because of the barriers we had put around them. And so over time, that sea now is a quarter of the size of what it was. And there's still existing border related issues there. So the northern part of the sea is kind of flourishing, but they built basically a dam there so they could hold the water on the northern side. But that ties back to economic sanctions that were placed on a country during the Cold War.
Didn't somebody go back to Khrushchev though?
Yeah, well, and that's what he did. Yeah, he basically took all the water from it. They rerouted all of the water from it because they couldn't get for wheat. They didn't have a breadbasket to trade with.
And cotton.
And cotton, yeah.
Well, we are so grateful that you chose to spend time with us today. We stay tuned. We'll keep having these conversations.
When is the children's presentation?
It's next Sunday.
Next Sunday.
Next
Okay,
Sunday.
good.
So come, we're
this
gonna
is
have
pretty
breakfast for y'all. You're gonna hear from the students. It's gonna be a wonderful day. So please come and support them by listening.
Are they still making I know it's toward the end of the year, are they still making microloans this year, or is that? on hold?
Yes. So the way the program works is that money that they have, they get the same pot of money for all of their years. It just stays in circulation. So each student brings $25 of their own money, and the church provides $200 for them to make a total of 9 loans. So as their loans are repaid, they make new loans. And with every year, when they're talking about different things, they're making different types of loans. And then when they graduate, that money gets swept back to the church, and then I use that to fund the next student. So if you ever hear me say, like, you're welcome to donate to this program, I don't do a ton of fundraising because I don't kind of need it, because it's in circulation, which I think is a great thing about the program too. And they're learning about, we talk about in year one, we do a lot of talking about financial terms, interest, risk, debt, currency devaluation, all these things that Ben Bowersox teaches them about. So they're learning a lot here at St. John's, and y'all should be very proud of supporting them and these students. And we're just really grateful for them. So thank you for being here. Have a wonderful day. Thank you so much for all your little cuties.
Yes, we got
Khrushchev had the Virgin Land